Hello and welcome to another edition of Redleg Roundtable. I have a great guest today, Cam Miller. Thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, and Cam, let's start out by telling folks who may not know, and I can't believe there's folks that don't, but what is it you do and what's your connection with the Reds?
I am a filmmaker, composer, editor, dog owner, all of the like. I'm a Renaissance man, as they say, but my connection to Reds goes back 20 years. I was one of the first hires at the Reds Hall of Fame in 2004, and I worked there, moved my way up to full time. But then they needed a guy to do audio visual, and I was like, I can do that. So by doing that, it kind of cost me my job.
Mm,
So I left them to become an independent filmmaker, which gave me more clients. But there's nothing like going to a client and saying, "Oh, my guys at the Reds Hall of Fame," because that's my biggest client, right? So the Reds.
sure.
So having them as my, as friends, coworkers, all these years, it's just been fantastic. So that's kind of how I got into the filmmaking business. So it's been an incredible journey. But again, I get to do baseball films. Are you kidding me?
Wow. And the reason to have you on, beyond some of the other projects you've done over the years, is the upcoming project, The Machine in Reds Country. Um, Beyond excited as a group here at the Riverfront to see this when it comes out. Tell me a little bit about kind of, I guess you already had, worked on this a little bit to start with, and now you've kind of thrown it together as more of a collab with the Reds, and it's off and running right now to put together a film about the Big Red Machine.
Right. I mean, it started in essence in 2019 when we were going through that, 150th anniversary thing, and the Hall of Fame was getting updated. And we were talking about 2020 was going to be technically the 50th anniversary of the Big Red Machine, right? If you take 70 to
Mhm.
79, the Big Red Machine era. But of course, the pandemic happened, things got put on the back burner, and other films took precedence. So I decided to have a meeting with the Reds with my good friend Warren Brown, who I'll talk about later, and we decided to, hey, let's go ahead and do this for the 50th anniversary of the first championship team in the 70s, 1975. It kind of worked out with my schedule in between things. So, of course, I already had a start on it, so which was awesome because now I'm in the pre-production phase, but I've already kind of got a leg up on the script and the idea I had back in 2019. So we're moving forward with it. It's just going to be such a great film. And one of my first feature length documentaries I've done in a while. It's been a while. So this isn't going to be one of those 30-minute Reds Hall of Fame theater productions. This is going to be a full-fledged doc. So with going over the a couple weeks ago with the Reds, having the meeting, talking to my friends, Rick Walsh, Chris Eckes, all those guys, and saying, hey, how can we make this happen? So we are all, as they say, all systems are go. The cylinders in the machine are clicking, and we're ready to fire it up.
Well, your ties with the Hall of Fame, but even the work you've done in the past already, you could make this film probably without a cooperation with the Reds type situation. What does kind of walking hand in hand do for you as far as being a filmmaker and really making it, I guess, official? So,
Well, I mean, access, of course, is number
mm,
one. I mean, having the access to some of the archives and having the access to connections. And that's the biggest thing, I guess, connections, because a guy will know a guy that knows a guy that has something that you want to film, and they kind of put you in the position to get that done. And of course, just the friendship that we've had. It's not just a working thing. I mean, 20 years is a long time. And
yeah.
I tell the story all the time. My first day on the job, I walked in and, Ken Griffey Jr. is talking to Sparky Anderson, who's talking to Tony Perez, who's talking to Joe Morgan. I mean, that was my introduction into the Hall of Fame. Like, this is the greatest job ever. Is this like this every day? And of course, they're like, no, this is a special occasion. But having that first, initial, oh, this is unbelievable, and having the building being unbelievable, and then learning the tricks of the trade, so to speak, and then having those connections with the Reds like I've had over the years just makes this so much more easy to work on. No question.
Well, let's go back in time to young Cam, and how did you get bitten by the Cincinnati Reds bug?
Well, I mean, there's a photo, I've posted it on Twitter and Facebook and the like, of me as a newborn, probably a couple months old, on my dad's lap with one of those old radios in 1974 at a picnic table listening to the Reds. So osmosis, I guess, it kind of sinks into you. It's part of you. And then there's photos of me watching my first game on television. And then there's photos of me in a little Reds uniform. And years later, I found out, which is incredible to me that I didn't know this already, that I always thought my first game was in 1979 because I have a visceral memory of that. The green AstroTurf, the seats,
Yes.
red, gold, green. I just have that. But my mom says, actually, your first game was game 2-3 of the World Series in 75. I sat in my mom's lap. So
Oh, wow.
again, you're at that. I obviously way too young to understand, but it sinks into you. And as you become, your dad's watching it, Marty and Joe on the radio, it's on TV, you start playing Little League, you get favorite players, they get traded. Tracy Jones, I'm talking to you. Oh, it was miserable. You have that connection, and being from here and my family from here, it's in your blood. I mean, that's just the way it is. And getting a chance to not only be a fan and root for the home team, I also get to work with the team I grew up with. And I still pinch myself every time I do a project. There's just nothing like it. It's just been an absolute dream.
Well, no doubt about that. Now, mine as a young baby, the picture that, obviously I don't remember, but I see the picture, the Running Reds logo that you have behind your I believe your right ear there.
Right.
Um, I, I'm on an Afghan that my great grandmother made on my belly, and the shorts that covered up the diaper of this little me is that logo, but it says "I'm behind the Reds."
That's so funny. I have those same shorts because I'm bent over as a child, and my mom took a picture of it. I'm behind the Reds on the
There
backside.
you
Yep,
go.
I
Yeah,
have it
so
too.
that's it. I was born in '79, so a few years younger than you. My first game was not until '88, and I grew up in McConnellsville, Ohio, which is south of Zanesville, north of Marietta, all the way over by the Ohio River on that side of the state, and 3 hour drive to get to Cincinnati. So I guess my grandparents and my parents figured I better be into it before they make that trek. So in '88 we go, and Chris Sabo hits a home run against the Giants, hits a triple. Third baseman Kevin Mitchell for the Giants at the time. He hadn't moved to the outfield yet. He misplays the throw. Sabo scores. Reds win. Great first game for me there. So that was great fun.
That's awesome. And you probably can remember, like I do, my most the most I guess the sensory part of it is the
Yes.
sound of the crowd when something happened. Of
Mm.
course, the smells and the visuals and the scoreboard, but the sound of Riverfront when it was just exploding.
Mm-hmm.
I've been to a lot of ballparks. Nothing captured because of the way the circle, sure, Pittsburgh, sure, Philadelphia, sure, St. Louis, but the Cincinnati crowd, when they went berserk, you can still hear it echoing through my head.
Absolutely. And to your point earlier, so this is a time when you don't have HD TV.
Right.
For me, it's over the air from very far away. We got Columbus's WTTE 28 would broadcast the games
Right.
that were over the air, and so the AstroTurf looked almost grayish green. I had a Reds hat, but the Reds hats on TV looked kind of melted a little, not as bright red, and the white doesn't look as white. And you walk in, and I was convinced that those were not the Reds on the field when I first got to my first game, and that AstroTurf could not be that green. The sensory of the site, the smell of Riverfront, kind of that, and we use this lovingly, that dank kind of wet concrete smell.
Yep. Damp.
We all remember it.
Between
Yeah.
that and the stale beer and the cigar smoke and there was something about that. And I remember we were going to do a exhibit at the Reds Hall of Fame one time a few years ago, and this was for Crosley Field, and we actually tried to find a machine where we could pump in cigar and stale beer smells. We were so into that, but of course it never worked. But yeah, that was just, we really wanted to capture that because that's what it is. Like right when you're a kid, when you walk into that ballpark, whether it's the first time or the 50th time, you immediately become overcome by the senses. And I don't think there's another sport like that. Football, sure, but it's just a noise. It's noisy, and it's kind of like there's nothing like the quietness of just hearing the bat and ball at batting practice and hearing the organ play. There's something about that that's just incredible, and I still feel it when I go to the ballpark.
I think I went to 7 opening days at Riverfront, and I went to the playoff game in '99, the play-in game, the game 163. I was at a playoff game in '95, but post strike, it wasn't a sellout. It wasn't quite the same. You put that whole outfield and cover it, because most games you went to, from foul pole to foul pole at Riverfront, the red seats probably weren't very full, but those games it was. And to your point, that sound, the 1999 play-in game. I know we got behind early, but I'll never forget how loud that place was.
Right. Just incredible. And I remember that. Like there's nothing like that sound. And you'll never get that at GABP. It's unfortunate. And it is what it is, right? It's just a different era. It's a different ballpark. I wish fans from, a certain age, a demographic could experience what Cincinnati baseball is like at its peak. It's like, when the Bengals are successful and you have that crowd, which is fine, but it's open air. It's a little different. I'm telling you, you're absolutely right. I mean, the Cincinnati sound, if you will, at a baseball park, there's nothing quite like it.
Do you know the funny thing for me was, and I've been to pretty much every opening day since GABP opened, but I went to a game in May of 21 or April of 21 after, there were COVID restrictions, didn't allow for all of 2020. And then even I didn't go to opening day because I wasn't a season ticket holder. And it was, obviously I think it was only 20 or 25% capacity. But the crazy thing is, if you said, all right, only 10,000 fans came to GABP, those fans would be concentrated more, toward behind the plate, whatever. The game I went to, it was Eric Davis Funko Pop Day. They had the social distancing all around the stadium. So there were fans all around GABP, even though it wasn't full. And to hear like people booing the umpire from all around when you knew there was only whatever that was, like, 12,000
Right.
people there or 15,000 people. That was a really weird feeling to
Yeah, I
have the
can't
sound come.
imagine. I didn't make it to any of those games. I was in my home office working, and I'd heard those stories where it was just very unique and surreal. That was the whole experience was just so odd. But I can't imagine being and listening to that, like hearing a guy have a conversation with his wife or girlfriend over here,
Yeah,
and
it
then
was
somebody
so strange.
that's
And
great.
well, that was the Joey Votto triple play against Cleveland
Ah, yes, where he
game.
should have had an
He
unassisted
he
triple
could have
play.
run over to third because
Yeah,
Ramirez was already in the dugout, and I was like, "Don't throw that ball." My
right,
son
right,
and I, we were in a. I love those seats. There's about 4 or 5 rows in that 400 level behind home plate, and
right,
so we were just at probably whatever that is, 423 or whatever that section would have been,
right.
and I'm just yelling, "Don't throw it! Get over, run over there! It's unassisted." Oh, that would have been
Yeah.
beautiful. Um, Okay, let's go back a little more though. You grew up a little earlier than I did, but you were closer too, because like I said, 3 hours away. What was it like to know that, hey, you could go to the ballpark and maybe mom or dad was taking you? Like just that feeling of kind of how special it was to get to go to a game.
It was incredible. I did a film a couple years ago, Riverfront
Mhm.
Remembered,
I
that
wanted to bring that
was
up. Yeah.
yeah, that was such a fun the premiere for that was it was bittersweet because I had lost my father on June 30th of that year, and, I hadn't seen my family for a while, and the first time I saw my mom, my brother since he'd passed was at that premiere in September, which happened to be on his birthday, by the way.
Mm.
So that whole premiere was very odd because I was so excited to get this film out, but I was also remembering the guy that took me to the stadium, my father, right? But besides going with my mom and dad and my 3 brothers, I also had the luxury of getting on my Huffy bike in Latonia, Kentucky, going the 30, 40 blocks straight down Madison Avenue, cross the Blue Bridge, the Singing Bridge, the Roebling, and parking in a bike lot next to a phone booth. Remember those kids? And going into the ballpark on businessman specials back in the day, right? In the
Yeah.
summer, especially. Um, and my mom to this day can't believe that she let me do that because I mean, today that's not something that kids are going to do, right? It's just a different time.
How
But
old did
doing
they
all
give
of that, I would have been 9 or 10 years old doing
Wow.
this. So yeah, on my bike with my friend. Here's some allowance. We'd stop and get some baseball cards in the way and a
Yes.
soft drink, and then we would head down to the park. We get a program for a quarter. You do the whole thing, and there was something so cool about being on your own. It was a playground. So we would go up and run around the red seats and flip
Yep.
over, try to spell things and be goofy. But then we would watch the game, and then no cell phone. We'd have to call my dad at work on a payphone and say, hey, can you pick us up? Because we were exhausted and tired. And he'd throw the bikes in the back of the station wagon and we'd head home. But that's something that when you experience things like that, and the baseball game was what mattered. It was about going and rooting for the team to win. But the thing about it is, and I explain that in the Riverfront film, I don't remember any wins. I don't remember who got hits and who didn't. I don't remember who made errors. I remember the experience. I remember the fireworks after a home run. I remember the scoreboards glow. I remember how the sausage, ad and the Mr. Red race. I remember those things, the experience. And that's what I think it's missed a lot today, because when you go down to a ball game now, it's just sensory overload. And that's, again, it's the times. But I wish that fans, and what's kind of why I make these films, can experience what it was like to go to Riverfront Stadium and experience a baseball game with the greatest baseball team and the most tradition of all baseball teams in the world. I cherish those moments, and it's why I do what I do. Because if I didn't get that experience, I don't think I would be doing this.
Another sensory point to your point. The first game I went to June 18th. It was my grandmother's birthday, and so it's middle of summer. The seats were more kind of shiny. Now it's more of a matte plastic finish on the red seats that are around Great American Ballpark. But I remember how hot the seat was when you sat on it.
Yeah, you better make sure you pull them shorts down, and when you sit on it, be prepared. I remember that. I would put my shirt. I would always have an extra shirt because I would always sweat through it when I would be riding my bike, and I would put it in my pocket. I had to sit it down on the red seats because you're right, it was on fire.
And the other thing too was funny. You mentioned completely enclosed stadium. We sat. It would have been 89 or 90. We sat more in right field and in the yellow seats, I believe it would have been. And so you could see some of the skyscrapers. So even though it's a closed-in building, and then I bought a reprint of it, but remember the caricature T-shirts that they had back in the late 80s, early 90s?
Right.
I got the Eric Davis one when I was a kid. I've got it as well now, and it actually shows on the other side of Riverfront some of the downtown buildings.
Right.
And I just remember, hey, I was looking at those same buildings from my seat, and certainly now you have PNC Park that opens up into the beautiful bridge and downtown, and people lament that Cincinnati didn't do that too. But you would have had a home plate facing the sun,
right?
In those 4 p.m. games if they had done that. And certainly the hitters aren't unhappy now that they don't have to look into a sun while Hunter Green's trying to throw pitches to them.
Right.
But no, just those memories. Now the Riverfront. Now you did the Bengals and the Reds. Actually, you released the Bengals one later. The thing I like about those, and I know you're an artist, filmmaking is an art. The sounds you pump in, and even just the walking up and you hear the PA announcer, and I want to commend you on the way you did that, because it's very inviting, and you're showing us, like you said, what it was like. And those of us that grew up with it, we can remember it better now. But also, like you said, the folks that maybe didn't grow up in that era, they get to see what it was like and hear what it was like.
Right. And that was so important to me. And you're absolutely 100% right. Thank you for bringing it up. And when I talk on Sports Talk, and I talk and do these radio spots and whatever, I know we don't have a lot of time to talk about, so I don't get to bring those things up. So thank you for bringing that up. That is so important to me, because film is 50% sound, right? You have to have you watch Star Wars, it's not the same movie without John Williams' score. It's just not. It's not successful. So when I was incorporating with the Riverfront ones and with this Big Red Machine one too, I'll be doing the same thing. I wanted to capture, when you first hear that prologue and you hear the sound of the bottles and cans and the PA, if you were there, you immediately are taken back to that spot. Absolutely 100%. When you first hear that, I'm back in Riverfront. And that's why I made that film. I made that film so you were at Riverfront in the red seats 30 minutes before the first pitch, batting practice is going on, and you're looking up at the Jumbotron and you're watching a history of Riverfront documentary. And then when you leave, you're out of Riverfront. That's kind of the style I went for with that. So you could hear the singing bridge when you would be close to it. When you would be on the plaza level, you could hear the cars going over the bridge. You still can today. some of the concrete, when they were working on the stadium, 1968, 69, 70, the jackhammers, right? Those are actual sound bites from 16 millimeter film that I incorporated. It's actually what was making the stadium. I tried very hard to get those authentic sounds, the sounds of, the crowd. Those are all from Riverfront. The PA announcing, it's all from Riverfront. It's easy to fake that, today. It's easy to do that, but I try to stay true to the subject matter. I try to stay absolutely authentic to what you're watching, and I also produce the soundtracks, right? I compose the music. So I'm able to feel that and sense that and know what it takes to bring that, that visual that you're seeing to life. And you'll remember it. And the people that weren't there, they're going to be able to say, oh, my dad was talking about that. He just, had a reaction to this. What's this about? You're going to have a conversation about it. And it's just so much fun to make films like that. And I did the same thing with the Bengals, and I'll be doing it with this upcoming film.
Well, you just completely brought something back to mind. When you parked underneath the stadium, it was that cans, bottles, and it might
Yep.
well, it was alcoholic beverages, whatever it
Not
said.
permitted in the
Not
stadium.
permitted.
Yep.
Welcome to Riverfront Stadium, and you heard it 2 or 3 times because
Oh, easily.
you're
Yeah.
walking to the escalator. You take the escalator up, and you keep welcome to Riverfront Stadium. Yes,
Right.
absolutely. Um, what I guess when you're diving into the projects like the Riverfront one, what was something maybe? Do you remember anything you left out that you wish could have got in? Because you did have that tight window of about
Oh,
30 minutes.
I absolutely did. It was so hard not to put in the great moments, right? When you watch that film, you don't see what we've seen 100 times, right? Pete Rose hit, Johnny Bench, 1972 home run, the perfect game. You're not seeing or hearing those moments. I purposely left those out. It was a tough decision.
Mm-hmm.
But when I got to thinking about it, we know those moments.
That's right.
We know those like the back. It felt like it was forced when again, I go back to what I said earlier. I really wanted it to be a history of the stadium from why they wanted to build it, how they built it, to the end. And the end was what I really wanted to make sure that people understood. Like, this place was a concrete palace. It was a dump. It smelled terrible, but champions were made there. Championships were won. Great players were there. And the original cut was like 2.5, 3 hours when I started putting those moments in, and I started to expand it, putting it tight and making it, like I said, 30 minutes, you got your popcorn, you got your beer, and you're watching the Jumbotron, and you get a history of Riverfront Stadium, and it's game time. That's kind of how the angle I wanted to go with. And making the stadium, I put the footage in reverse from the demolition at the beginning of that film. So at the beginning, you see the stadium, and it's, a lot of people didn't realize it, but it's actually, the footage was shot a couple of days before I did it. So it's current footage. You can see Great American Ballpark to the right, and then the stadium kind of comes back to life. I wanted to make sure people understood that this place was awesome. If you got to experience, I hope you have some wonderful memories. If you didn't get to experience it, you're now going to be able to relive it and kind of get an understanding of it.
One thing I'm amazed by is, actually, I've fallen more in love with Great American Ballpark over the years. But the thing about it is, Riverfront Stadium just was not taken care of. Like, one of the things the Castellinis have done, and say what you want about the product on the field, obviously, but one of the things they've done is reinvest in the stadium beyond even what Hamilton County's obligated to do. And honestly, that stadium might be nicer today than it was when it opened back in 2003. If you think about where Riverfront Stadium was, you had co-tenants between the Reds and Bengals. That when they hadn't even started to build Great American Ballpark yet, and this place was falling apart. Think about if you sat in the red seats or the green seats or certain areas, you could not hear the PA because the speaker system was so outdated and blown out and bad. And I remember just lamenting that as I was a college student in that transition between, hey, we're going to build this stadium right next door. The Bengals were a little head start. And I go to the games and I think, I can't wait to be in a stadium where I can actually hear what the announcer's saying, and things like that. So the lament here is, and again, as a baseball ballpark, I think Great American Ballpark certainly far exceeds what Riverfront was capable of. But the lament is that place we grew up as being our dump
Right. Right.
could have been preserved better and lasted longer. And even when they opened up the outfield, a la Shea Stadium, a little bit to make room for Great American, put in grass instead of AstroTurf. You're like, oh boy, they could have made this a little bit more sustainable.
There was so much potential, absolutely. And I remember when they made that decision, and I was like, wait till people see what the possibilities could be if they would open this up. And it was on the table to renovate it. Obviously, it would have taken much more money. The bones were not good. If it had good
Uh,
bones, then maybe. But yeah, it's unfortunate. And I always say you're absolutely right. Great American Ballpark is far superior as far as the ballpark experience is concerned. But I think at the time that Riverfront was around, it was about functionality, right? Get in, get out. You came down to watch a ball game and you left. There was nothing else. And it was at the time it was built, they had the largest parking garage in the
yes,
world. So it's like when you have that, that's all they cared about. Bring them in, watch a ball game, buy some concessions, and get out of Dodge. Now it's such a different experience because the river is now a part of your entertainment district, whereas before it was just the Ohio River and you're just trying to get from point A to point B. You're not thinking about it as a sensory thing. You're not thinking about it as someplace, a destination. And I think that had a lot to do with why they didn't keep up with it. That coupled with the fact that the Reds and Bengals, they didn't agree on
that's right.
anything. So it's a shame. You're absolutely right, though. It's too bad that they couldn't have figured out a way to kind of incorporate. And I always said, and I brought this up in meetings with the Reds, that when they tore it down, they should have left one of those gates, because the way the semicircle was, you could have left an actual gate from Riverfront there in the plaza level, kind of like where the baseball field is there at Great American, where you could have done something where the gate could have been left there as a kind of like an ode, an homage to Riverfront. But of course, that costs money and time and effort, and sometimes that's tough to deal with.
That's right. And you even had in the current parking garage, you had where plate stood and things like that.
Right.
Hey, this season this year you've worked on two different podcasts. I believe they're audio only, correct?
That's correct.
Um, they're celebrating anniversaries. We've celebrated on Redleg Roundtable the 1999 seat team. I've been blessed to be able to talk to several of the players from that team, and Hal McCoy and Marty Brenneman shared memories as well. You're doing a Team 99 podcast and a Team 64 podcast. And certainly those, I guess from your standpoint, you remember 1999 vividly, and you probably have some research to do, but that partially comes from memory. The 64 team, especially nationally, nobody knows about that team. Here in Reds country, we know about it a little bit, but that's always remembered as the Cardinals and the Phillies race. But that 64 Reds team was right there as well. Talk about tackling those two topics in your knowledge base first, because in 99 you have vivid memories from that season, having lived through it.
Right. And it's because I didn't have anything to do, right? That's what I needed, is some more stuff to add to my plate. But
That's right.
I decided to do the 99 first because I knew it was coming up, and I had talked to Danny Graves last year when he was getting inducted. I followed him around with the camera, and I got footage for the Hall of Fame. So that was a fun experience. I always do that for the inductions, but being around his peers, right, his teammates, those guys that he played with in that era, they were talking about it still, and I'd always got the vibe that 99 was a special team, even though they didn't win it. So I was already like thinking I could do a film. Well, of course, filmmaking is a lot of work, and I am the department of one.
Yes.
So there was no way I was going to be able to do a film, but I was like, podcast. I can easily type up a script, throw in some sound bites. I have access to a lot of great recordings from 99 as well as 64. So talk about 64. That team was going to be a film based upon the last days of Fred Hutchinson. It still might be a film. We've got some things to work out. I really want to make that film. I think it's important. His story is incredible. But having him dying of cancer while this team that really wasn't expected to do much, they fought hard, so hard to try to win it for Hutch. And it's an incredible story with some unbelievable players. I mean, you have Pete's second year, Joe Nuxall on the tail end of his career. You got Vaden, Frank. an unbelievable team with the backdrop of their manager kind of blowing it off at first. He's like, I'll be fine, right? I'll be fine.
That's right.
And he wasn't fine. And he, passed away shortly after the season. So telling that story through a podcast, media, it had to be done. I just felt 60 years. Let's do a team 64. Let's do a team 99. Put them out there. The response has been fantastic. The emails I get from people are just so, so great. So I'll be doing more of those, I think, in the future. Things that I really can't fit into my film schedule, I will be making podcasts for. It's just so much fun.
Well, and you have access to, like you said, the radio interview you put up with Willie Mays shortly after his death. Forgive me, I forget the Reds announcer's name, who had interviewed him.
Yeah, Claude Sullivan. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that so timely, and the fact that you had access to that certainly helps you.
Right.
But to hear that interview, because those kind of interviews were done all the time across the league, I'm sure, but to have that in the archive and be able to dip in and get that right.
Yeah, you never hear those. Those are so rare. And I have access to hundreds of those pregame interviews. I've got one coming up here shortly where it's Tony Perez in between a double header when he just got called up. So he's talking to Claude, very broken English, of course.
Sure.
And Claude's trying to say, so where are you from? What's going on? Like this newcomer, right? So that interview, 15 minutes of that. Are you kidding me? It's gold. And that was the great thing about it is that those pregame, they called him the Diamond Dope with Claude Sullivan. And he's out at Crosley Field. He's got a microphone by the dugout, and he's interviewing all these people, Reds players, as well as, like you said, visitors, Willie Mays. I've got Hank Aaron, Sandy Koufax. There's so many great interviews that were done before the games at Crosley. And the great thing about it is a lot of them are from 1964. I was so lucky to find these. So they're fantastic. And I'll be peppering them into these, Team 64 podcasts. And you're going to love them, man. They're so great.
I know I will. Well, think about the fact, let's strip away some things. Strip away our smartphones. Yeah. Strip away the internet. Strip away the ability to watch basically all 162 games on either Bally's or national TV or Apple TV or wherever they're putting it on this given day. And in 1964, even in the 70s, they weren't on TV all that often, maybe game of the week. And that's when I talked to my grandfather about it. The idea that he got his information from the transistor radio, listening to the entire pregame, game, postgame, because where he lived, he didn't get the Inquirer. It's 3 hours away, right. and you might get a box score in the Zanesville or the Marietta paper. And maybe they had an AP writer or whatever, UPI or whatever they used back there in the 70s. But going to the 70s and even more going back to 64, you could not get the information almost any other way.
No, and then think about it. Also, it wasn't recorded. So once it was played, it was over. You weren't going back to listen to the podcast of it, right? It was so you had to remember it. And you would go to school the next day. And I remember my dad talking about this. He grew up in Indiana, Yankees fan, but he followed the Reds and became a Reds fan when he came here to marry my mother. But he was talking about how he would have to listen to those things and write things down. And you have to kind of talk about it at school, right? Did you hear that interview with Willie Mays? I mean, and if you missed it, you missed it. And that's just the one thing that I think that it wasn't better, of course, because now we have everything at our fingertips, but there was something magical about that puts you in the position to be able to talk to other fans and your childhood classmates or your grandfather, whatever, about what you had heard the night before. And you could that's how it grows. And then you could tell somebody else, and it just goes on and on and on. You're absolutely right. Without the radio broadcasts and those pregame, and there was a lot, every team had them. It's just a shame that a lot of them didn't survive because there wasn't a necessity to keep that stuff. It was kind of like, we did it, it's over, it's done. But there were so many great ones that did. I'm so thankful that I have access to a lot of them.
The one thing I had in the late 80s without cable, and I don't know how many games, what has it been, Channel 5 in Cincinnati would have broadcast on the over the air, and then Columbus picked it up. I don't know how many games I got to watch, but it wasn't many. But what I did have was a sporting news subscription. And every week you would basically have the whole previous week's box scores. And then Hal McCoy at the time was the guy who submitted the copy. But I probably learned more math going over those box scores. And how did Paul O'Neill do this week? Oh, he was great. And then Eric Davis had the most amazing week of his life, and the grand slams. And so no, I have a small taste of what that was like, even beyond. But now, like you said, it's good, and but it's also makes us nostalgic, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. We're that kind of that last era, right? I had Baseball Weekly at the drugstore. I'd go up and get Baseball Weekly, and I'd bring it back, and I'd be schooling, because I actually moved away from here in 1988, the summer of 88.
Oh, wow.
So basically it was the Reds All-Star game at Riverfront, in 1988. I got to go to the workout. And then a couple weeks later, Tracy Jones, my favorite player, gets traded to the Expos. And then a week after that, I moved to Greenwood, South Carolina. My dad was a robotic engineer for Cincinnati Millicron. So he moved to South Carolina. So we had to follow through getting the games at night on WLW on a good, clear night. You could listen to them, but we got a subscription sent to us. So I would get all of the box scores, my family would, a couple days later, because we had a Cincinnati Post, and they would come in the mail, and we'd go through it. I got a Reds report. It'd come in the mail, and I'd go through it. I kept scrapbooks of all of it, but it would be on a delayed basis. But that kind of upbringing, and moving to Michigan a couple years after that because of my dad transferring, having to follow the World Series team from a different place, it made you appreciate it even more, I think, because I wasn't, I wasn't right there like I used to be. And you take me away from it hundreds of miles, and I'm follow every line. Anytime ESPN's up and there's a little highlight, today it's at your fingertips, highlights everything, the access. It's just incredible. I always say I would love to have had YouTube and things like that back when I was a kid. But then I started thinking, it's like, I don't know if I really would have turned out the way I did if I had all that stuff. So, but yeah, we're the last of that kind of generation that had that, old school vibe, if you will, of communicating with baseball.
My sister's favorite player was Tracy Jones as well.
You're
So
kidding me.
she
I
shared
went to Riverfront Stadium with my family once, and there's a picture of us. I had a banner. Remember banners? You could actually bring banners to the ballpark. And there was this big banner that said, "Don't be left without a trace. Jones 29" instead of John 3:16, right? Jones 29 at the bottom, like a Bible verse. And we took it up there, and we were waving it. And then when he got traded, it was devastating. Absolutely devastating. I couldn't believe it. It was like, Montreal, why?
Well, he ended up on the radio there, and he was doing the post game during that 1999 season. I imagine you might have some clips of him.
Yes, indeed. Oh yeah.
I remember the big argument being Greg Vaughn's batting average.
Yeah.
and Tracy imploring the fan base, he's here to hit ribeye steaks.
Right. You're not worried about him hitting 385 like Sean Casey. That's what Casey does.
Yes.
Let him just rake and hit home runs into the green and yellow seats.
That was hilarious that whole season. Ribeye steaks, and he actually got his average, I think, up to 245. It was not even that for a long time.
And he's beloved. Think about that. He hit 245, but he is beloved by Reds fans today. So
if you had a rankings of 1 year Reds, I mean, he would be at the top.
Oh, no question.
I mean, you've got Chu in 13. You've got even Mike Cameron in that 99 season.
Right.
But Greg Vaughn, you're right, is beloved. I'm still chasing him to try to get him on the show. Hopefully we can make this happen sometime. Yes. Let's talk, before we talk about the machine, and I'll let you go shortly. Tell me a little bit. I know you talked about the memories of not remembering maybe who got the hit or who won the game because you went to games and things like that. Do you have a favorite on the field memory throughout your time as a Reds fan?
Wow, that's a great question. I do remember there was a specific game. We had lived in South Carolina, like I said, in 1990. I was in South Carolina during that great run of that team. And we took a vacation in August to come up to Riverfront. And I was able to go with my family, my three brothers, my mom and my dad. We got some pretty good seats at Riverfront Stadium for the Giants-Reds game. And the Reds fell behind 4-0. Matt Williams hit a home run. I want to say Scott Scudder gave it up. I could be wrong, but I remember Sabo hit a home run, and they just kept chipping away. I think Oliver, and they ended up winning. And it was like, I couldn't believe that the Reds were down 4-0 in the first inning, and they came back and won. And seeing them in person, it was the only game I saw of that team that year in person. So having that memory of being there with my family during a championship season, I will never forget that. But it's kind of interesting now that I've been on the Reds, being in the around the teams in the last 20 years, being able to be last year with my son. I was able to go down on the field and talk to Pete and Tony and all of the guys, Johnny, on the field with my son as we're down there milling around getting some shots and photos. So that was probably my best memory, right?
Mhm.
Because I do that stuff all the time, but this was with my son because he was working with me. And I told him, I will never forget this. I told him when we were sitting there and Ellie De La Cruz is talking to Pete Rose and I'm filming it, right?
Wow.
Incredible. And I'm right there 2 feet from it. And my son's right here. And I whispered to him, I said, never forget this day. You will remember this day for the rest of your life, that you were on the field with all the hubbub going around and you're looking in at Pete Rose, the greatest hitter of all time, talking to Ellie De La Cruz in the dugout, feet from you. Like
Mm.
that, it was an incredible experience. All those greats around you. So that has to be my top on field, being on the field memory. But as far as being a fan, yeah, just that 90 team was so cool. I was 16. Baseball cards were my life.
Yeah.
It was Reds baseball cards, and then girls was third.
That's the order, huh?
Yes.
Yeah, there was a time when it was probably that for me as well, and then unfortunately, or fortunately, maybe the baseball cards got pushed down
Yeah.
at least third, maybe lower, when the girls came along. Okay, let's wrap this up talking about the upcoming documentary. It's a full length film, as you've said. Um,
Yes.
is this the official title? And if it is, I love it because you incorporate the fans, basically, the machine in Reds country. Talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely. Oh, it was always going to be this. This title was always there because we decided a long time ago when I first, talked about doing this with the Reds and the Reds Hall of Fame, that I didn't want to make a MLB Network 30 for 30 ESPN style film.
Mhm.
Let them do that. That's fine. Talk to the players ad nauseum, because that's going to be the national thing, right? That's what people would want to see if it was the 30 for 30. Pete, Johnny, Joe, the whole thing, the greatness. And I hope they do make that one day. I wanted to make sure, and it was very important to me, that this film, number one, it was not going to be an hour of the Great Eight. There were 116 players that played for the Cincinnati Reds from 1970 to 79. Some, of course, more important than others. But that reign of 10 seasons, they finished in first or second place every year but one year, 1971, when they were just ravished with injuries. They were 1, 2, or 3 in attendance every year except 1971. They won 90 or more games in 8 of those 10 seasons. They won 100 games 3 times. They were the greatest 10-year span. Just take that 10-year span, the greatest team ever assembled. But we always focus on the Great Eight. Rightfully so. They deserve it. But Hal McRae, Ed Armbrister, right? The pitching staff never gets it to do. I wanted to make sure that that story is told. Aside from just the Big Red Machine as a functioning machine of it, the longevity, how it started, how it ended, the 116 players that made it happen, Reds country. It was very important to me that Reds country was given its just due. The reason why there was 21.5 million fans that came in Riverfront Stadium during the decade of the 70s, the reason why they finished 1, 2, or 3 in attendance during the decade of the 70s is because Riverfront Stadium. If it was in Crawley, that wouldn't have happened.
Mm-hmm.
Riverfront Stadium, the access from 71 and 75, right? First of all, you could go in 2-hour drive, like you say, 3-hour drive. You go in and an afternoon at the ballpark. Couple that with the fact that there was over 110, it got up to like 130, I believe, at the end of it, radio stations, the radio affiliates. It was only second to the Cardinals. The Cardinals always had the most, but right behind them was the Cincinnati Reds. So that made that market, small market being what it is, it was an incredible market from the plains of Illinois to the mountains of West Virginia. You had this incredible Reds country that came in far and wide, that went to the caravans, that tuned in on the most powerful radio station in the country, 700 WLW, that also had all of these, peppered through the Reds country were these radio affiliates and ticket outlets. So I'm telling this story, The Machine in Reds Country, which is the title. It's going to be the story of the Big Red Machine, but also I'm going to be traveling to all of these spots and talking to fans that grew up or were older people, that were listening to this on the radio. And I'm going to these diners. I'm going to be going to all of these places, these dive bars that, were around in the 70s. There's a few still left, believe it or not, and how they would interact with the Reds. I want to make sure that the story comes together. It's two worlds colliding. The Machine needed Reds country. The Reds country needed the Machine. So there was this unbelievable story of all, and the stories I've heard so far are so good. My travel schedule is going to be crazy the rest of this summer, but I'm so looking forward to getting out there and finding some guy in a bar that's going to tell me about how he heard Pete Rose get the hit or whatever, 3,000th hit, or he saw, on the radio, on the TV when they were playing a highlight on the news, and he became a Reds fan. And made his kid become a Reds fan. It just, Reds country is more than Cincinnati. It's spread out far and wide, and bringing those two together, because it was at that time when Reds country was starting to grow. Before Crosley Field, it really didn't happen. Also, lastly, the film is going to be, like I did with Riverfront, you're going to be taking a trip back to the 1970s. So the style of this film is like you're on your remote, on your clicker, the loud clicker, and you're watching something in 1979 after the Reds lose to the Pirates, and basically the Machine is ended. It's over. Had a few years in the 80s there, of course, but the Machine ends in 79 after that postseason, the loss to the Pirates. And it's a couple of months after that, maybe, and you're flipping on and you see a documentary about that team and about Reds country. So, and I said this the other day, I've been watching a lot of 70s films to get the color and the vibe. My mother found me a red laser suit to wear for the premiere. So get ready for that, my friend. That's going to be fun. I was talking to Sadak about that the other day. So, yeah, I'm really excited about this. This is going to be one of my biggest, most in-depth, most involved projects I've done in 20 years of working alongside the Reds. And it needed to be done because we're already losing them. We lost Joe Morgan, Don Gullett, Bill Plummer, all of these guys that played on those clubs. We're starting to get to that point where they're not going to be around much longer. And all of those stories need to be told, and it needs to be shared, because if we don't tell the story, who's going to?
Mm-hmm. To your point a little bit, I think one of my contentions with the way the Pete Rose story gets told, you mentioned 30 for 30, there's different things. When they did the Sports Century back at the close of the century, Pete was on the list. And I'm telling you, it was 5 or 10 minutes of his baseball playing.
Yep.
And the rest is about what.
Yep.
And as a kid who I have memory of him as the Reds manager.
Yeah.
I have memory of him. I don't even know if I have memory. I have memory of his 86 Topps card. I think that still says player/manager,
Yes.
first base/MGR.
Yes.
I wanted to know, and folks can say what they want about Pete the person. That's fine.
Yeah.
I wanted to know more about him playing, and I read Keith O'Brien's book recently, and it does such a good job of telling me about Pete the player.
Fantastic book. Yes.
But to your point, and again, I'm stretching this out a little bit, but your idea is to serve Reds country versus what the news story is, or what, like you said, what would 30 for 30 tell? What would MLB Network Presents tell?
Yeah.
And I'm really excited to see this.
I'm telling you, just the pre-production phase, there are days, again, I can't stress this enough. I get to do some things that are just extraordinary that the other people wouldn't have the access to do or the connections to do. This film, even in the pre-production stages, I've come across some things that are they're blowing my mind, number one. And I get up, make a pot of coffee, get my day going, and I have to work on some of this. I'll work 3 or 4 hours a day on it, sometimes less, depending on my schedule. But there'll be something to come up that the hairs of my arm will stand up. Like, I can't believe I can do this. This is an amazing thing. Where can I fit this into the story? I've got I was going to mention Warren Brown. Warren Brown is a friend of mine. He was the bat boy for the Cincinnati Reds, 1970 to 72.
Mm-hmm.
The stories he tells. Can you imagine being a kid and getting to be the bat boy for the Cincinnati Reds, 70 to, like, and the reason he gets the job is because of Pete Rose. Pete
Mm-hmm.
Rose gets him that job. He tells the story, and it's an incredible story. But he's an associate producer on the film with me because he has connections and he has great stories. And he was there. I mean, he was there when the Big Red Machine started. He went to the front office later, so he has all these tales to tell. And I have coffee with him, and they're just incredible. Like I could sit for 6 hours and listen to him. But having him on the team really helps me with some other things that I normally probably wouldn't think of because he's coming at a different perspective. Just in some incredible stuff. I'm actually in the process of gathering old radios. I probably have 5 or 6 now. Old cars will be shown where you can see the radio and you're tuning in to the affiliates. So there's going to be this 70s vibe to it, putting you back in that era and also telling about how, like you said, Reds country, how this whole thing, how is it possible that Cincinnati, Ohio was home to the greatest dynasty in the history of sports? Don't look at just the championships. Look at the Reds country and what they drew. Look at the way that they took care of business, the way there was the no facial hair policy, the way it was this Midwestern thing, black shoes, clean, crisp uniforms. It was an unbelievable phenomenon that we will never, ever see again. This wasn't New York or Chicago or LA. This was Cincinnati, Ohio. Small market Cincinnati, Ohio. So I think it's important that this story is told in this manner, not with the, like, there's nothing wrong with those guys at MLB Network. There's nothing wrong with the 30 for 30s, but they're doing quick bites. And like you said, the betting scandal, this, and then here you go. There were so many great stories that don't get told because we always focus on what's going to make the headlines. And I think it's important that we tell the whole story of what happened between 1970 and 79 and how unbelievable it is that it happened on a little town on the riverbanks.
That's right. As a bit of a joke, and I'll let you go on this, you could do a 10-minute segment of this film dissecting the picture of Pete wearing his own T-shirt, hand in a weird pocket of those tight pants, holding a drink. I think that's in Tampa, but Joe Morgan's next to him.
Yep.
That picture alone could tell a story.
That should be the poster.
That's what I
said. Yeah.
There you go. Well, Cam, thanks so much for joining me. I came in not knowing how long we'd talk, and here we are pushing 53 minutes. So I really appreciate all your time. Tell the folks a little bit about where they can see the film eventually, and all the details that you have so far.
Obviously, early in the stage, we're going to show it next year, 2025, the 50th anniversary, probably the spring. I'm working on showing it in a theater. There'll be some charities involved, but I wanted to show it in a theater, right? A theater experience first and foremost, and then bringing maybe some players in, bringing some people in to have that premiere event like I did for Riverfront, the Hall of Fame. We'll also show it at the Hall of Fame. But after it has its little run there of outside venues, I'll be putting it on YouTube for free like I do all my films. So everybody can see it that can't come down here. Because after all, this is for Reds country, right?
That's right.
So people need to see this wherever they can. And I hope to do some theaters in some other places if we can make the arrangement. So we'll be doing that in the spring. And as we're going forward, there'll be more ways you can get involved of helping with the film, helping with the production of the film. I'll be sharing that on my Twitter at Cam Miller Films. You can go to youtube.com, Cam Miller Films. There'll be information there as well, and trailers and all of that stuff. So we're working on a website, so there's a one-stop shop. So that'll be announced shortly too. So lots going on here at Cam Miller Films, and I'm so excited to tell this story.
Well, in the meantime, folks, go to wherever you get audio podcasts and check out Cincinnati Baseball Historical Review Podcast with Cam Miller, Team 99, Team 64. Team 99 is going to have a drop this week, I read. So
it's out right now. So.
Oh, okay. I'm going to, and this will come out a little later. So you can check that out as well. So thanks so much, Cam, for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Take care.
All right.